Welcome. In this demonstration, we will learn how to draw stones, with layers of jagged edges. So essentially, in my previous demonstration, I've showed, how to draw a stone, a simple rounded stone, right? Something like this, where we use the parallel lines to essentially create, different tonal differences. And this gave it a nice, rounded appearance of a simple rounded stone. And then we also saw how to essentially, create a kind of, a cut in the plane of a cut in the surface of the stone, and essentially, add more interest to the stone. So what I will do in this demonstration is to essentially show yet another way to create a more interesting shapes for the stone. And what we will do in this demonstration is to create stones, that have those layers of jagged edges. And you will see in a moment that that there are many different kinds of stones. In a sense, stones have again infinite varieties of the different planes and cuts and shapes and sizes. So what I'm attempting to do in my different demonstrations is to show how how you can draw stones that have different shapes and different kind of planes and things like that. So what we will do in this demonstration is to see how we can have a stone that has different layers of jagged edges. So the way we do this is to start by creating an outline of the stone. So what I did is to essentially create an outline in dotted line, something like this. So this is the outline I did. And what we do next is to essentially pick up a spot and essentially bring down this line, something like this that I did over here. And I can do the same over here, something like this over here. And what these lines are doing is essentially defining the different layers. And we will see in a moment how we can convert these lines into planes. And I will do something similar over here on this side as well. So essentially what I did is to essentially create a simple stone that has these lines representing the kind of planes on its surface. And in the next step, what we do essentially is to convert these lines into planes. And the way we do it is to start from one edge and we start to use these parallel lines to essentially define a kind of cut on the surface. So this is how we do it. So what I just did to essentially kind of add these parallel lines, and what happens is that by addition of these parallel lines, that line that line essentially gets converted into a kind of plane. As you can see, now this this represents a kind of jagged plane that we have on the surface of the stone. And I'll do the same for this line as well. And the key point is to always start with the dot, and you continue for those areas that should be visible when you're looking from this point on. So essentially what I do is I start by a dot, and then I slowly increase the size of the lines, something like this over here. And what I will do is that when this line turns inside over here, I will essentially not use the line. So essentially, to illustrate over here. So if I have a line, something like this, then what will happen is that I will continue and go up to this point, but I will not essentially use the lines for this, because this is something that is going inside, and essentially, that plane will not be visible to the viewer who's looking, from this angle. So that's what we do essentially. We start and we use and we add those parallel lines to represent the plane where that plane will be visible to the viewer when they are looking from this point on. And over here, for example, as this plane goes over here, this plane will not be visible straight on, so we end over here. So this is something like this. So this is how easily, essentially you can create these kind of jagged planes on the surface of a stone. And over here, for example, if I want, I can again bring down another line over here to just create a small plane. And at this point, what you can also do is essentially at the edges, just create a kind of nice transition. So what I'm doing is essentially kind of creating a rounded transition over here, and this point this goes inside and gets hidden behind the other plane that is emerging. And then I will again go ahead and add a bit of parallel lines over here, something like this. So there you have it. So this is how easily you can essentially create these kind of stones that have these kind of jagged layers. And the other thing you can also do is to make this edge a bit darker, and the bottom you can make a bit lighter. So this will also show that over here there's less light, so this is essentially kind of a bit up, and then you can reduce the intensity of your lines as you go down. So there we have it. So this is how easily you can easily create these kind of jagged planes on the surface of your stone. And again over here, if I want, I can again simply bring down one more line. And what we will do is to essentially repeat the same thing on this other side as well. So over here, what I will do is to essentially again add these kind of parallel lines over here. So as you can see, by adding these parallel lines, I again converted that line into a nice plane on this side over here. And as you can see again, my lines are most biggest when they are facing straight on in this direction, and as they go up, I reduce my size of my lines, because this plane is that getting away, facing away from the viewer, and will not be visible. And over here again, if I want, I can add a small plane over here, and it's very easy. So again, I start by adding my parallel lines, and there we have it. So just by adding these parallel lines, and always remember to end them in a point. So essentially what we are saying is that these planes, they start from the edge and then they come and they end on the surface of the stone. So these are the kind of planes that we are defining in our demonstration. So here I'll again add some more lines over here, and this creates a kind of plane that is visible on the side. And at this point what we can do essentially is to extend this plane something like this all around the stone. So that will define the the bottom of the stone over here. So I'll go back and again use the parallel lines, and again the depth of the parallel line will determine how deep that plane is. So we will just use a kind of not too deep plane. So here what we are now defining is essentially the base of the stone over here, something like this over here. So this is how easy it is essentially. So again, just to recap, essentially create an outline of your stone shape. And again, you use dots because what will happen is that you will have to essentially tuck this different planes inside. So for example, over here what I would do essentially is to bring it and then essentially make it go back inside. So essentially what will happen is that this is a plane that ends over here, and this is another plane that is emerging. So essentially using the dotted line helps you kind of easily create those shapes over here. So essentially once you create the dotted line, you just essentially bring down a line from different places that you want to essentially have those jagged edges, and then you use this parallel lines to essentially easily create these kind of planes. And again, just to convert a line into a plane, what you do is you bring down these parallel lines, and there, this dark area essentially represents a cut, and this defines a plane. So essentially, what we have done is to essentially create these parallel planes in our stone. So essentially, the kind of stone that we have in these demonstrations, they have these kind of parallel planes that are cut on the surface, and there again, they are different. They're layered, so that gives stone a very interesting feel. So that's the kind of stone that we want to draw in this demonstration. And again, I'll go ahead and add this one. So again, as you can see, there is no really limit in a sense. You can easily play with the different kind of shapes you want. So for example, here you can bring this line in, and then what you can do is again from here you can again start and have a small plane like this, and then from here again. The other thing to keep in mind is that start the second layer from a little bit of inside like this I did over here, and there you have it. So this is a nice layer of planes that I just created, and then I will again go back and add these parallel lines to convert that line into a vertical plane. So there we have it. So this is how easily you can create these vertical planes and have a stone that has a very nice interesting feature of these kind of jagged vertical planes layered on one another. So this is a very yet another different way to create a stone, right? So this is another feel for a stone. And what you can do at this point essentially, once you have defined these kind of jagged layers, is to essentially kind of do some texturing on their horizontal face as well. So essentially these are our vertical planes, and what we also want to do is to create some kind of texturing on these horizontal planes. The easiest thing to do is to simply use a kind of parallel line, something like this, that represents their surface. So again, if you want, you can add a bit of text and some these text marks that we have used in other in these kind of rounded stones. So if you want, you can use these tick marks, and if you want, you can even create additional planes, something like additional cuts that we saw in previous demonstrations. So if you want, you can add that as well. But the simplest is to simply I use these parallel lines and just give it some kind of a texture over there. So I use parallel lines over here just to create this form, and then I just add a bit of text here and there just to create there, give it a bit more feel for a stone. So there we have it. Just using the parallel lines takes away that white. So essentially we do not really want that white feel for the stone, because they usually have a kind of texture. So what we do is we use these parallel lines just to give it some kind of texture, some kind of tone, and then we can add a bit of if you want this kind of takes and marks like this, just to give it a bit more interesting feel. And at the end, what we can do as well is to come back and make the edges a bit more jagged. So essentially, like I've explained before, if you have a line like this, you can add a tapered darkness. So always add it in a tapered manner, something like this. So you can add the tapered darkness at the edges, and that gives an illusion of a cut and makes the edges a bit more jagged and more interesting. So that's what we can do over here as well. So there we have it. So this is how easily you can essentially create stones, more interesting stones that have these kind of vertical layered edges. And at this point we can also create a few of them using the same step that we did for the rounded stones. So essentially we saw layers of stones. What we saw previously is to essentially create the stone in the front, and then essentially create these additional stones behind, right? So you start from the edges of the stone in front, and this is how you can easily create the layers of stone lying on the ground. And we will do something similar over here. So since we have the stone that is up front, what I will do is to again just use a dotted line to essentially create an interesting shape for the stone, something like this over here. So again, this is very organic. So this is what I really like about drawing stones, is that you can easily play with the shapes, and every time from your imagination you can come up with some interesting shape and use that for your composition. So again, what I'm doing is to essentially create these 4 stones that we will use for this demonstration. So, if you want, we can even add one more stone, something like this over here. So what I'm doing over here is to again try to use interesting shapes. So that's one thing you always have to do, is to with the stones, don't use these kind of fixed rigid shapes, because what that does is that it makes it doesn't give interest to your composition. So again, try to use interesting shapes. And again, once we have it, what I will do essentially is to again bring down one plane, something like this over here. Then I can have an additional one over here, and if I want, at the base, I can just have a small one over here. So as you can see, what I'm doing is to just play around with the different vertical planes that I am adding to my stone. And once I have these lines defined, then that specify the location of the plane, what I do is to again start by adding vertical lines over here. Now the thing to keep in mind is that over here, these lines, as if you have a line that defines a plane like this, over here this plane is facing away from the viewer. So in this case, you will not add any vertical line over here, because this is kind of straight on. So you will add a vertical line over here, and then you will start to make it small as you go towards here. So what will happens is that in perspective, the plane that is head on to the viewer will be the most visible, and the plane as it recedes away from the viewer, it becomes smaller. So that's what we do. That's what I just did over here, right? So over here, this plane is most visible, so this is kind of biggest, and then over here it becomes smaller. And what happens over here is, again, I will add a little bit of it just to give it that interest. So here you can see what I did was to wherever the plane is visible. So over here, again, as the line is going up, a bit of the plane will be visible over here. So again, I add a bit of line over here. But again, as the line becomes straight on, then that plane will not be visible to the viewer. So you have to be careful in terms of making only those areas of line that where the plane will be visible to the viewer. Only there you should add those vertical lines. So there. So this is how this line gets converted into a plane. As you can see over here, this area, this portion is straight on, so it will not be visible to the viewer from this angle. So I did not do any vertical line. Actually, it's not even possible to add vertical line because it is vertical itself, right? So whenever you're not able to add a vertical line, that will tell you that you should not be adding any lines over there. And what I will do over here, so again, go ahead and just add a bit of parallel lines over here. So as you can see, even just addition of a bit of parallel lines, gives our mind, right interpretation of the kind of, plane that we have created. And over here again, I will just go ahead and add a bit of vertical lines over here. There they have it. So again, it's real simple to essentially use these lines and then bring down these parallel lines to create those vertical planes. And by using different layers of them, you can create very interesting shapes for the stone. So over here, if I want, I can bring it this back inside, and again create a small plane over here, and then start another plane from here, something like this. Again, if I just bring down another plane over here and then add one more. So there you can see that just by playing around with it, you can get many interesting shapes and different planes defined, and that will really make your stones have a great interest and make them very visibly appealing. So again, what we want to do with stones whenever we do it is to make them visually appealing. So essentially, we do not want a very flat stone that has very simple edges. So that might do if your stone is not the main object of interest. So for example, if you have a composition in which the stones are on the side, then you can use very simple stones. But if you want a composition in where stones are in the center of attention, then you want more interesting shapes for stones, something like what we are doing over here. So again, once you have defined these vertical planes, what you can do again is to just use these vertical lines. And what you can also do is to essentially use the direction of these lines to essentially define the orientation of these planes. So for example, over here, I can use the line that goes something like this to essentially say that this is sloping a bit, something like this over here. So essentially, the direction in which you use these parallel lines indicate the kind of slope of that stone. So there we have it. So just by adding the lines in this direction, and as you can see, I've also changed the direction of the line to give it even more interest. So over here, I'm using the lines in this direction, and over here I'm using it this bit in this direction. So this is also giving a hint to the viewer in terms of how the overall shape of these different areas, or the different slope of the stone in different areas is. So this also conveys interesting information and helps the viewer get more out of your drawing. And what you can do in the end is to again go add a bit of dots and ticks here and there to essentially give it a bit more feel for the stones. And at the end, we can all again come back and just add a bit of jaggedness to our edges just to give it a bit more interest. So there you have it. So this is how easily you can create the stones. But also one thing to always remember is to make a bit of base for the stone. So over here again I will come back and just add a bit of parallel line just to create a bit of base for our stones over here as well. And we will do something similar for our other stones as well. So here I will create this line, and let's just make one more line over here, something like this, and a bit over here. Over here I will create this line over here and bring down from here one here. So as you can see, the process is very organic. Once you create those shapes for your stones, then essentially you can bring down a line from wherever you like, and essentially create very interesting stones. And I will go ahead and over here then I will again create this parallel line, use this parallel line to essentially convert that line into a plane. There we have one over here. Then I will use the same for this side. Then I'll go ahead and again use this parallel lines over here just to convert that line into a plane. So there you have it. Just by adding the parallel lines, again I'm able to convert that line into a vertical plane. And again I'll just go ahead and just make these edges a bit more interesting just by adding a bit of jagged darkness and things like that. There we have it. And at this point again you always add more lines. So if you want, you can have stones that have much more of overlapping edges and things like that. So that's totally up to your interest. But yeah, what I'm trying to show you is a very simple principle, how you can create these kind of jagged overlapping layers in a stone, and then use that that technique to essentially create stones that have visual appeal, and they are a bit more interesting. And again depending on your composition, you can combine these kind of more interesting stones with the simple rounded stones that we have drawn earlier. So again there are many different ways in which you can draw stones, and what I'm doing in my channel is to essentially show you different ways in which they can be done. And at the end of the day, what you need to do is to essentially look at these different demonstrations, learn how the outcome of that demonstration fits in with the composition that you're doing, and then use it effectively to essentially do and you can combine the different techniques that I'm showing in different demonstrations to essentially create an interesting composition. And what you can also do at this point is essentially just to differentiate between the stones, is always also good to kind of have a bit of darkness around this area. So wherever the stones they have a common edge, you want to make it a bit darker because that area will receive a bit less light, so that will kind of also helps us kind of distinguish between the different stones. So what I will do is again add a bit more parallel lines essentially wherever the stones are kind of hidden behind one another, and you can even add a bit of darkness to make this area a bit darker. So what I did was to just add a bit of darkness over here, and adding this darkness essentially kind of also helps us kind of differentiate between the different stones. So I just did that, and then now you can see that just by adding a bit of this darkness, the stones they have a clear definition. And what I will do is essentially is to use the same for these two stones as well. And again I will just simply use these parallel lines to convert that line into a vertical plane. And again the length of these parallel lines will determine how deep your plane is. So essentially I'm not using too deep a plane, right? But yeah, in some cases if you want, you can give a very deep plane to a stone as well. So there we have it, right? So essentially, and over here if I want, I can just again add one more small line, and there we have it. So again very easy, very simple, very quick, but very effective. I really like this technique because it really helps you create these stones with very interesting shapes and character. And there we have it. And at this point I will just again bring down one over here and simply add a bit of jaggedness. So always remember to add this jaggedness to the edges of the stone, because that also gives them a bit of depth. So essentially what we are saying is that there's a cut and there's a kind of imperfection in the surface of the stone, and what happens is that wherever there's an imperfection, there is a kind of small crevice. You always have a darkness over there because the light gets trapped. So just by making these edges a bit kind of imperfect in terms of having a bit of darkness, gives that feeling. And that is very important, in at least for a stone where you want to convey that imperfection on its edges. And there we have it. And then what I will do again is to use this parallel lines to essentially kind of give some definition to the surface. And again I will use the direction of the lines to essentially kind of convey some information about how the stone surface is oriented. So there we have it. So again I added one more stone over here, and what I will do next is essentially do the same for this stone as well over here. So I'll again go ahead and just use this line and kind of turn this into a plane as well over here, and then I will use this again line. And again, so the key thing is always that these planes are ending in a point. So that is how these surfaces are. So essentially this is a plane that goes from here, it has a cut, and then it ends at the surface of the stone. So the surface is where this ends in a point. So you always have to remember to end this in a point to convey that feeling. So there we have it over here, and then I will again go ahead and make the edges a bit rough. At this point, if I want, I can even bring one more plane over there as well. something like this over here, and if I want one more plane over here. So again, as you're making your stones, you can always add different planes on the fly over here. And then at the end, then I will go ahead and add a bit of vertical plane over here, just to give this stone a bit of base. So there we have it. So I just added a base to this stone by adding the verticals like at the bottom. So this is how you can create these stones with nice interesting vertical planes that are overlapping and giving it very interesting character. And again, over here what I will do is to essentially use this direction for my parallel lines to essentially indicate that this stone is sloping in this direction over here. And again, and at the end, then I will again add a bit of tick over here, add a bit of tick over there, just to give it some more interest. And we can also go ahead and add a bit of darkness over here where the stones are kind of intersecting with each other. Again, just to differentiate different stones from one another. So there we have it. So this is how you can easily create these kind of interesting stones that have these kind of vertical edges that overlap, and you give a very nice character to your stones over here, right? So at this point, what I can also do is to just add a bit of darkness over here, over there a bit, something like this, just to give it more interest. So there we have it. So this is how you can create these stones. And at the end, what I will do is to simply add a bit of grass over here. So again, there are a lot of different elements that you can add at this point, but what I will do is to simply create a bit of grass over here in the ground, just to provide some kind of ground cover. But yeah, again, so you can use these stones in your composition, and again combine them with many different elements, right? So you can have different trees over here and other elements. And yeah, a stone with this kind of interesting jagged overlapping edges, they have more visual appeal compared to the simple rounded stones. But like I said, depending on what role a stone is playing in your composition, you can either create this more interesting shape, something like this, or you can just simply use a rounded stones, right? So there are different ways in which you can use stones, and depending on how much interest you want for those stones, you can either use more jagged edges like we did for this demonstration, or you can simply use stones that are very simple rounded stones over here. So there we have it. So again, at this point, the good thing with this technique is that at any point, if you want, you can always go ahead and add more edges. So for example, if you feel that the stone is missing something over here, then again, go ahead and add a bit of edge over there. So it's just very easy. Essentially, simply you draw a line, and then always remember to end at a point, and from here you draw the vertical line. So essentially, this is how you can convert any line into a plane. So essentially, this line, vertical line, defines the depth, the cut on the stone. So essentially, by drawing a line and then using these vertical lines, you're able to convert the line into a plane. And essentially, again, to recap, what you do is define the outline over here, and then essentially you draw one line, and then you draw another line. And what is happening is because of this shape, this plane is above, so it is first, and then this plane is behind that other plane. So you get this series of overlapping planes that we are seeing over here, and that really makes the stones very interesting. So there we have it. It's a very simple but very effective technique to create stones that have these nice interesting overlapping vertical planes, and yeah, create these stones and use them in your composition. Thanks, take care, bye bye.